A lot of young people are today seduced or persuaded or forced into working as unpaid interns. Do you have a policy on unpaid internships? The second part of that question is, a great many more people are on 0 hours contracts or working for minimum wages. What is your policy on 0 hours and minimum wage?
I'm going to deal with 0 hours contracts and the minimum wage first, because I think 0 hours contracts is one of the worst things that's currently happening in employment law at the moment. I've actually been on 0 hours contracts myself, and it's not great at all, to even say that kindly. You get up in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, you put a suit on, you sit there from 7 o'clock in the morning, you wait for a phone call that might never come, for a job that might never happen. That is not a way for people to be treated. And particularly seeing companies like Sports Direct that have over 80% of their employees on 0 hours contract, and they have been on those contracts for a number of years, is completely wrong. We need to reform that and make sure that the exploitative element of that is outlawed, because there is a place for 0 hours contracts, in my opinion. There is a place, and it works for some people, but at the moment the balance between them is completely with the employer, and we've got to rebalance that. And when talking about the minimum wage, one of the biggest issues here in South Thanet is that over 42% of people are paid less than the living wage. We're a living wage black spot here, and that means the taxpayer is subsidising low pay through tax credits, housing benefit and other things. We need to make sure that we're paying a living wage. The much maligned Thanet Council, I might add, is a living wage employer, and we need to make sure that we increase the minimum wage, because over the last 5 years it's actually reduced in value. So we need to make sure that low pay is an issue right at the heart of it, and Labour is committed to increasing the minimum wage to £8 an hour and also incentivising businesses now to bring in a living wage. And my answer to the other question about unpaid internships, Labour has abolished them for our parliamentary party, and if I'm elected as the MP, I will never have an unpaid intern, because if somebody's willing to do the job, then it should be paid, because we can't just have Mr. Rich Boy or somebody that can look after themselves being able to go for the internships, while someone else who might have better skills or be able to do the job is left out. Thank you.
Once again, I think Liberal Democrats are ahead of the game on unpaid internships. We passed a motion nearly 18 months ago to say that we would make them illegal. They are absolutely abhorrent, and I think they should not be allowed at all, because it is essentially down to your means as to whether or not you can do internships. So they're wrong, and nobody should do them, let alone the council or the government. They should be outlawed and not be allowed at all into the marketplace. When we move on to the subject of the minimum wage, I'm very clear that living wage, as far as I'm concerned, is the minimum. I employ people, and the minimum wage is my starting point, and I move onwards from that. You have the power as consumers to, if you go onto the living wage website and look at them, they identify companies that pay the living wage. Ask the people in the local area. I'm up for rewarding local businesses that say that they're a living wage employer, and we should make preferences and use them. Look what happened when Starbucks didn't pay their corporation tax, and the shock they got when people stopped buying coffee. You have power. This is not just down to politicians. Find out who in Thanet is a living wage employer and use them. If they're not a living wage employer, don't use them. And that goes for fast food restaurants and the hospitality industry and all of those other industries that are paying people at the minimum wage. You have the power. It's not just down to politicians. And reward those living wage employers in Thanet.
There is a place for unpaid interns at times, because sometimes people want to volunteer. But when they're jobs that ought to be paid, they should be clearly banned. Now, 0 hours contracts, we've made an absolute commitment that these will be banned in the future, because it doesn't allow anybody the opportunity to plan for a mortgage or even think about planning for a mortgage, and they are totally unacceptable in my view. And I do actually agree with Russ on this one, that you should perhaps vote with your feet, vote with your money, to see who are using staff on 0 hours contracts and don't use them accordingly. I mean, I've long since used Starbucks as a company because of my disgust at what they do avoiding corporation tax. Now, the argument about a living wage versus a minimum wage is a complex one. I'm very pleased to say that in my business, 25 staff, people are all paid quite in excess of the living wage. But it is, I think, the most powerful driver that will actually get wages up across this country is full employment. And I think for the first time, for a very long time, we have the opportunity of full employment in this country. So when there's going to be a shortage of labour to fill the jobs, that is the time that you raise wages. And I'm seeing that happening in many businesses that I deal for. Very few actually pay the minimum wage anymore. But what we've had, I'm afraid, there's been almost an encouragement of low wages through some inequities in our benefit system. And that worst one that was ever invented, frankly, which I saw as really an electoral bribe of high proportion, was the tax credit system. I could tell you stories where people are actually earning £18,000 a year in tax credits while having £1 million worth of assets in the bank. That's all going under universal credit. So I think the days of these appalling contracts, excesses of tax credits and interns are coming to an end.
Once Al Zababas took over and left England, it would be run on an agricultural economy. So everyone who wishes to stay, like all the English that wish to stay in the Afro-Phoenician Caliphate, will have to take up jobs in the field. From that, though, we will be banning machinery, so you'll be using primitive tools.
Okay, right there. We're obviously, you know, I'm a businessman in Canada and I pay the living wage, so, you know, obviously I agree with that, because we really don't want to, you know, it's subsidised by the government. I mean, you know, especially when you're a big business paying a minimum wage, it's plainly ridiculous.